Oh, what's going on, guys? HK Titan here with a brand new video for you guys. But first things first, as always, I hope you guys are having an amazing day. So in today's video, I have something new planned for you guys, and we're going to be doing a tier 5 tower tier list. So for this tier list, it will be based off of my experiences while getting every single black border in Bloons Tower Defense 6. So that being said, please feel free to let me know in the comments below if there's any towers that you disagree with, if I place them too high, or if I place them too low, and then we can go ahead and have a little bit of a discussion about it. But anyways, guys, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump straight into it. Alright guys, and here we are with the tier list. Now, as you guys can see, this tier list is going to be a little bit different than the normal tier list. You guys can see that we have at the very top towers you need to use. Then we have the double S tier all the way down to the D tier. On top of that, I also have a couple more selections at the very bottom. So the first thing is just needs a price change, then needs a rework / buff, and then of course the money towers at the very bottom, because there really isn't a good place to put them that's going to like do them justice, especially since we're basing this off of chimps mode and then a couple of other modes as well. So the first tower that we're going to be starting off with is going to be the Avatar of Wrath. Now the Avatar of Wrath definitely is a very good tower in my opinion. Like, it's not like a double S tier or a S tier, but I do believe that is definitely an A tier because, like I was saying, it is a very strong tower. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Comanche Commander. Now guys, when it comes to the Comanche Commander, this is a tower that I absolutely love to use because it looks really cool. I like the mechanics of the Comanche Commander, but at the same time, I definitely think it needs a little bit of a rework / buff because right now it's pretty much useless unless you're using it for a little bit of stall, but even then, like, the stall really isn't that great. Next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Grand Saboteur. Now with the Grand Saboteur, this one's going to be a little bit hard to place because if we look at the tier 4 version of the Middle Path Ninja Monkey, obviously we would throw it more towards the double S tier or the SS tier, but because we are going to be basing this more off of the tier 5s than the tier 4s, I'm going to go ahead and throw the Grand Saboteur under a B tier because, like, there's really no reason to go for the tier 5. It's better to just go for the tier 4. Next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the MAD. Now the MAD is a little bit on the pricey side, but with the price you definitely get a bunch of popping power, especially against Moab class balloons. So I'm going to go ahead and throw the MAD under the AA tier. I would throw it under the S tier, but it does struggle really bad with dealing with super cerams. So with that being said, unless it has a better way of dealing with those ceramic balloons, I'm definitely going to go ahead and leave it under an A. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Super Mines. So with the Super Mines, they are a really strong tower, but when it comes to using it in most game modes, there really isn't an option to use it because it's just so expensive. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and throw the Super Mines as our first tower that just needs a price change in order for me to use it more, and in order to make it a little bit more effective. Total Transformation. Now this is a tower that I really don't use too much, and I definitely want to start using it a bit more. I do hear really good things about it, which would make me more leaning towards the S tier, but because I really haven't used it too much, I am going to leave it under an A tier and just go off of word of mouth that the Total Transformation is a good tower to use. The next one is going to be the Homeland Defense. Now this is going to be the only tower that I'm going to be basing it off of the entire middle pathway. So that being said, this is definitely going to be the first tower that you definitely need to use in pretty much every single game mode that you play. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the biggest one. Now with the biggest one, I have used it a little bit. I haven't used it a lot, but when I've used it, like, it kind of really falls off kind of bad towards the later rounds. It definitely is a strong tower in the early game, but because, like, I feel like it falls off really bad in the late game, I am going to be placing it under a C. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be Primary Expertise. Now this is probably one of the towers that I feel is like super underrated in Bloons Tower Defense 6 because it does give quite a bit of popping power, and then on top of that, it also massively buffs all primary towers. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and throw it under a B tier. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Crossbow Master. Now with the Crossbow Master, it's definitely a very strong tower, but at the same time, like, once you start getting past like round 80, unless you like buff it a lot, it does kind of fall off really bad. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it under a B tier with the Primary Expertise, but I'm gonna go ahead and place it a little bit more of a high B B tier. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Balloon Master Alchemist. So when it comes to most game modes, there's really not a use for using the BMA unless you're going for the achievement or if you're going to hyper late game. But because there's really no reason to go hyper late game at this current point in time, I'm going to go ahead and throw the BMA under a D tier because in Chimps mode, it does cost you a lot of money. Now, if we're talking about the tier 4 or the tier 3, that is a little bit of a different option. I would probably throw it a little bit higher on the list, probably as around a B tier or maybe an A tier at the highest. But if we're talking about the tier 4, like I was saying, it would be a B. Next tower that we're going to look at is going to be Special Population. Now, with these Special Populations, this is a tower that I really haven't used too much, and I really don't keep track of if it's been nerfed, if it's been buffed. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead and throw it under the same category as the biggest one, even though I do know that the blowback effect that the tower has is a very good option for stall. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Permaspike. So the Permaspike is probably one of the best towers in the game. It allows you to experiment a little bit with certain towers that you play with. Now, just because it allows you to experiment with different towers and gives you that little bit of a safety net in the very back of the map, I am going to be placing it under an S tier, but that's being a little bit generous because once you start getting more towards the higher tiered maps, the Permaspike kind of becomes a little bit less reliable and you really don't want to use it as much. So the next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Flying Fortress. So if we're talking about the tier 4, I would definitely place this under either an S class tower or an A class because it does have global range, and on top of that, it's also a very good tower pretty much all the way up until around 90. But at that point, you definitely want to make sure that you have a little bit more of a support tower. But because again, we're talking about the tier 5 versions, I'm going to go ahead and place it at the very bottom here with the just needs a price change. So the next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Preemptive Strike. Now, this is the only tower where I feel like the tier 4 and tier 5 are both very, very good towers to use. So this is going to be our first double S tier tower, just for the simple fact that this tower is just like crazy good. On top of that, it allows you to one-shot the bad balloon on round 100. So I feel like this is probably one of the best towers in Bloons Tower Defense 6. Alright guys, so now we're going to move on to the Sub Commander. So with the Sub Commander, this is hands down probably the best tower in Bloons Tower Defense 6, apart from a couple of the support towers. But because like I've used Sub Commander to blackboard a lot of expert maps, the Subcom will always be a double S class hero as long as Ninja Kiwi doesn't hit it with a nerf. The next tower that we're going to move on to is going to be the Sky Shredder. So this is a tower that I kind of have mixed feelings about because I feel like it's a decent tower and I just don't use it to its full potential. But I have struggled quite a bit in using this tower in the past, so I am going to be placing it as a low B tier. I do think that some of you guys would probably place it as an A tier or an S tier, but in my personal opinion, I do feel like the Sky Shredder just isn't the best friendly tower in Bloons Tower Defense 6. So let's go ahead and move on to the Super Maelstrom. Now this tower is a tower that I definitely slept on for quite some time, but after playing some recent Odyssey events and like using them in some races, this tower is extremely good, and if you guys have never tried this tower for yourself, I definitely recommend giving it a try. I'm not going to give it a double S class, but I will give it an S class rating because I do feel like it's that good of a tower, especially since it's a little bit more on the cheap side. The next tower that we're going to move on to is going to be the Icicle Impale. Now, those of you guys who have been around the channel for quite some time, you guys will know that I absolutely love this tower. I feel like this is probably my favorite stall in Bloons Tower Defense 6 because it just helps out so much during the late game. So, in my personal opinion, I know there's probably going to be a couple of you guys who don't agree, but I do believe that the Icicle Impale definitely belongs under a double S class hero ranking. So now that we went ahead and rated the Icicle Impale, let's go ahead and move on to the Archmage. So I used to be like a massive fan of the Archmage back in when I was a newer player in Bloons Tower Defense 6. But ever since like I started playing more Chimps mode and I started playing on expert maps and I've gotten a little bit better at the game, I do start to realize that the Archmage just isn't as good as it used to be. or it just falls off super hard during the late game. Even though the Archmage is supposed to be good against Moab Bloons, I just feel like it can't handle the round 90 plus. So because of that, I'm going to go ahead and place it under a B tier. The Carrier Flagship. So the Carrier Flagship is another tower that I slept on for quite some time, but then once I started to realize like how good it is, especially paired with like the Preemptive Strike or the Sub Commander, I definitely started to use it more and more. So because of that, I am going to go ahead and place it under an S tier. I'm not going to be placing it under a double S tier because I do feel like if it's a solo dolo tower, it's not as good as Sub Commander, Icicle Impale, or Preemptive Strike, but I do feel like it definitely deserves a little bit of respect. Now we're going to move on to the True Sun God. So if we're looking at the tier 3 version of the True Sun God, I would definitely place it under an A class hero at the most, maybe a high B tier. But because again, we're talking mainly about the 5 version, I am going to go ahead and place it under a D. Now, I placed it under a D tier, but I realized that I have the Balloon Master Alchemist in a D tier, so I think we need a little bit of a new option here. So let's go ahead and add one more row here, just for the simple fact, like, there's no way that the True Sun God deserves to be in the same rank as the Balloon Master Alchemist. Because, like, it's just so expensive. So the next tower that we're going to go ahead and look at is going to be the Spirit of the Forest. Now, the Spirit of the Forest, I wish it was a good tower, guys. Like, I do know it does help with getting money when you have the banana farms on the field. But when it comes to actually, like, having good or a decent amount of popping power, it definitely falls off during the late game. So I do feel like the Spirit of the Forest does need a little bit of a rework. Maybe making it so that the Spirit of the Forest does have that stall ability without needing the monkey knowledge. Alright guys, so now we're going to move on to the Moab Eliminator. So here's going to be another tower that I definitely slept on, and I didn't realize that this tower was as good as it is. So because I started to use it a little bit more, and I definitely did a little bit more of experimenting with it, I do feel that the Moab Elim definitely belongs in a, actually I'm going to place it as a high A tier, because this tower is definitely super strong against Moab class balloons. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to the Prince of Darkness. Now this is probably going to be another one that people may have mixed opinions about, but for me, myself, and I do believe that the Prince of Darkness belongs in a high S tier, if not a double S tier, because this tower is just like so good, super cheap, and it's definitely a tower that you can use probably until most advanced maps. It does fall off in the expert maps, but again, it is a tower that I use all the way up to advanced maps. So let's go ahead and move on to the Sar Bomba. So this is a tower that, again, I really don't use it too much. I do know that there's a lot of potential with this tower, but it definitely does require a little bit of microing involved, and on top of that, you need to make sure that you have the ability off of cooldown whenever you need that little bit of extra support. So because I don't feel like this tower is super user friendly, even though I do use the tier 4 every now and then because I do know it's really good cleanup, especially in the late game, I am going to go ahead and place it under a C tier, because I don't feel like it's as useful as the towers in the B tier, but I do feel like it is useful in some cases. So let's go ahead and move on to the Balloon Solver. So this is going to be another tower that I really don't use too much, because like I don't really see the need for it, because in my opinion I do feel like it falls off super bad in the late game, even worse than the towers in the B tier. So because of that, I don't feel like it has as much application as the towers in C tier. So again, because of that, I'm going to go ahead and place it under a D tier tower. The next tower that we're going to take a look at is going to be the Sentry Paragon. So this is going to be another tower that I feel a lot of people sleep on, but if you guys have been paying attention to some of the recent patch notes and the recent updates, the Sentry Paragon has slowly been getting buffed as time progresses, and I definitely feel like it's a tower that you guys should definitely start giving a shot in Chimps mode, or pretty much any game mode in general outside of half cash, of course. But I do feel like it's definitely a tower that is starting to demand a little bit of respect. But I'm not going to be placing it as a high B tier, but rather I'm going to be placing it as a low A tier. I do feel like it's almost on the same grounds as the Avatar of Wrath, maybe a little bit worse, but at the same time I do feel like it is a decent tower in most game modes. So let's go and move on to the Balloon Exclusion Zone. So with the Bloon exclusion zone, I do feel like this is definitely a super good tower to use again in most game modes. It is a little bit more on the difficult side to get in chimps modes, depending on the map, of course, but it definitely does have a decent amount of popping power if you can manage to get it on the field. So let's go move on to the Pirate Lord. Now, the Pirate Lord, this is another one where I have a little bit of mixed feelings about. I do know that the Pirate Lord, it does have a pretty good ability to use for Moab class balloons, and it does have a super short cooldown. But I do feel like the main popping power, it kind of falls off super hard in the late game, and it's mainly about using its grappling hooks in order to beat Moab balloon. Let's go ahead and move on to the Grandmaster Ninja. So this is going to be a tower that I've used a lot in chimps modes. I've used it to black border a lot of advanced maps. I've used it to black border a couple of expert maps. The only issue with this strat is that it does need quite a bit of space to set up. But because it is definitely the most reliable way for black bordering #ouch, I am going to be placing it as a high S tier. Now, high S tier might be a little bit on the generous side. Maybe we would be better off placing him as a low S tier or a high A tier. But for the simple fact that it made my experience in getting #ouch black bordered, I'm definitely going to go ahead and place it under an S tier. So the next tower that we're going to move on to is going to be the Glaive Lord. So with the Glaive Lord, I do feel like it's a tower that I enjoy using in most game modes. But when we're talking about like chimps modes and impoppable modes, it definitely falls off super hard in the late game. I think it actually falls off pretty much the same as the Crossbow Master, but because of the price, I am going to go ahead and throw it under a low C tier, because again, it is a little bit more on the expensive side, whereas the Crossbow Master is a little bit more on the cheaper side. Next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Carpet of Spikes. Now with the Carpet of Spikes, I definitely enjoy using this tower because it does give a lot of popping potential to most compositions. It is a little bit more on the pricey side, but once you get the tower, it is definitely worth it. So I'm not going to be placing it under an S tier, but rather I will be placing it under a low A tier, because if you are going to be going for a Carpet of Spikes strategy, definitely need to make sure that you have ample popping power in order to get to the point where you can actually afford to get it. Now onto Ultra Boost. So with Ultra Boost, it's going to be one that I have a little bit of mixed feelings about, because I do enjoy using the tier 4 version in chimps mode, but when I start to think about it more and more, there are definitely better options. I mean, you have the Alchemist, you have the Monkey Village, you have Jungle Drums, but when it comes down to it, I just feel like the Ultra Boost and even the Overclock, it definitely needs a little bit of a price nerf, because like 14k for the tier 4 and then like what 100 and something for the tier 5 is just a little bit excessive, and there's really no practical use in most game modes unless you're going to hyper late game, of course. Let's move on to Super Brittle. So this is a tower that I've tried to use more and more. I do know that there's a lot of people who enjoy using this tower. They will swear by this tower, saying it's a very good tower to use in chimps mode, especially in conjunction with Attack Zone. But it's going to be one of those towers that I really don't use too much, so I can't accurately gauge this. I have used it a couple of times, and it definitely made the Attack Zone a little bit more effective. So because I have used it a little bit more, I am going to be placing it under a high B tier, but that's pretty much all I'm going to give it at this current point in time. Maybe once I use it more and more, I'll go ahead and place it a little bit higher, but again, for now, I am going to be placing it under a high B. Move on to Bloon Crush. So with this tower, I want to place it as a higher tier because of the amount of stall that it provides. But when it comes down to it, there really isn't much of a cause to go for Bloon Crush, because you have towers like Icicle Tail, you have towers like Super Glue, you have a bunch of other stall towers that are much cheaper and definitely do pretty much the same thing at a much cheaper cost. So because of that fact, I am going to be placing it under a price change. That doesn't mean that I'm going to be placing it under an F tier or anything like that. I just feel like it definitely needs a little bit of a price change in order for it to be a little bit. So the next tower that we're going to look at is going to be Super Storm. So this one is one that I'm up in the air about whether it needs a price change or a rework slash buff, because like this tower is just like, there's really no use for it. Like, it provides a lot of stall, and it's definitely good if you want to go for a hyper late game, because like it'll just keep the Moab balloons at the start of the map the entire time. But do we really need that in Bloons Tower Defense 6? I think there's definitely other possibilities with the Superstorm that could definitely be a little bit more useful in Bloons Tower Defense 6, other than a druid that just throws a tornado that knocks all balloons back in Bloons Tower. So the next tower that we're going to look at is going to be Bloons. So this is a tower that I feel like is kind of balanced when we're talking about the tier 1 up to the tier 4. But when we're talking about the tier 5, like there's really no need to go past the tier 4. So because of that, it is a little bit more of an expensive tower. I don't feel like it really belongs on this list, but I would rather see a little bit of a price nerf to this tower. And then I would definitely use it a little bit more in most chimps modes. So let's go ahead and move on to the tax zone. Now the tax zone tower I've used quite a bit. It did receive a little bit of a nerf where it can no longer pop lead balloons when you get it to a tier 5, but it's definitely something that can be fixed with either an MIB or it can be fixed with an alchemist. So because of the fact that it really isn't that big of a nerf, I am going to go ahead and place it under a high A tier, but I don't feel like it should go into an S tier, even though I do know that it is a very good tower to use on most beginner chimps modes. Moving on to Pop and Awe. So with Pop and Awe, I feel like Pop and Awe, out of all of the mortar monkeys, I feel like this is the one mortar monkey that is definitely in a really good position as far as the price of the tower, and then on top of that, the fact that it has the ability to stall every single balloon on the field. So because of that fact, I am going to be placing it a little bit more on the higher end of things, opposed to placing it in a C tier or a D tier. I definitely believe it definitely has a lot of potential in most chimps combinations. Now let's go ahead and move on to Super Glue. Super Glue is going to be a tower that, like, I know a lot of the more experienced tower or players in Bloons Tower Defense 6 aren't going to be a big fan of, because they feel like it really isn't a reason to go past the tier 4. But because I've used this tower quite a bit in a lot of chimps modes, I do feel like the Super Glue definitely deserves a little bit more respect that it's been getting. So because of that fact, I will go ahead and place it under a low S tier. I'm not going to give it the double S tier because it doesn't do as much as the ice tail. If we were talking about the tier 4 version or the tier 3 version, I would definitely place it under a double S tier. But again, because we're talking about the tier 5s, I will be placing it under a S tier. Moving on to the Elite Defender. So the Elite Defender, I know a lot of people really enjoy using this tower, but we have another case of the Crossbow Master or the Glaive Lord, where this tower just falls off super hard in the late game. But I do feel like it definitely deserves a little bit of respect, but I am going to be placing it under a low C tier, because there's just way better options other than the Elite Defender in order to pop the balloon. Alright guys, on to the Wizard Lord Phoenix. What can I say, guys? This is my favorite tower in Bloons Tower Defense 6, along with the Avatar of Wrath, of course. This tower is insanely expensive, but when it comes down to it, it's definitely worth the price of the tower. And on top of that, you also have the tier 2, you have the Dragon's Breath, you have the Phoenix Wizard. So because of that, I am going to be placing it as a high A tier. I want to place it as a low SS tier, but I don't feel like it belongs in the same category as the majority of the towers here. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it as a high A tier tower. Moving on to the Trade Empire. Do I need to say more, guys? Like, this tower just needs a rework, a buff, or it just needs to be deleted from Bloons Tower Defense 6. Because there is not a single case of needing to use the Trade Empire in Bloons Tower Defense 6 that cannot be solved by just using a mana farm. So now let's go ahead and move on to the Moab Domination. So the Moab Domination definitely got a pretty decent buff in a recent update, and because of that recent buff, it definitely makes it a little bit more of a stronger tower. So I think the Moab Domination is definitely creeping up on the power scale. So because it's definitely starting to creep up, I am going to be placing it as an S-class hero, because there really isn't a bad upgrade to go with the bottom upgrade past Boomerang. The next tower that we're going to look at is going to be the Infernal Ring. So with the Infernal Ring, I do know that it's a super strong tower, but when it comes compared to like the Super Maelstrom and the Tax Zone, where you can buy both the Super Maelstrom and the Tax Zone for the price of the Infernal Ring, I do feel like the Infernal Ring definitely needs a little bit of a price decrease. Maybe not too much, but I do feel like the current price of the Infernal Ring is just a little bit too much, even though I do know it provides quite a bit of popping power. Next up is the Permacharge. So with the Permacharge, it's definitely a tower that I slept on for a really long time until I started using it more recently. This tower is definitely a powerhouse when it comes to chimps modes and pretty much every game mode in Bloons Tower Defense 6. So because of that fact, I am going to go ahead and give it the respect it deserves and be placing it under an A-class tower. Next up is the Anti-Balloon Gunner. So with this tower, I'm going to go ahead and place it under needs a rework or a buff, because I feel like if Ninja Kiwi wants to make like the Super Monkeys these prestigious tier 5s to go for, I feel like the Anti-Balloon Gunner should be a little bit stronger and a little bit more expensive. Now onto the Ultra Jug. So with the Ultra Jug, I feel like it's definitely a pretty decent tower. It does have a couple of minor flaws where the tower needs to be used on maps that have like a close quarters, because if you have an open map, the Ultra Jug just isn't very effective. So because of that, I am going to be placing it under like a high C tier, low B tier, because even though I do know like it's the go-to tower for like Mesa Chimps modes and a couple of maps like that, I do feel like it's just not that great on maps that are a little bit more. Now onto the Permabrew. So with the Permabrew, I'm going to give it the same treatment that I gave the Homeland Defense. I am going to be placing it under the towers you need to use. It's not going to be the tier 5 necessarily, but more of the tier 4. Like, there really isn't a reason why you shouldn't have at least one alchemist on the field, no matter what game mode you're playing. So now onto Absolute Zero. So out of the Icicle Impale and Super Brittle, I feel like this one is kind of lackluster. Like, there's nothing that the Super Brittle or the Icicle Impale can't do that Absolute Zero can, other than of course providing a little bit of slowness effect to Moab class balloons. But if I want that, I would just go for the Icicle Impale. So because of that fact, I am going to be placing it under a low D tier and no higher than that. If you guys disagree, then of course let me know in the comments below. Next up is the Legend of the Night. So Legend of the Night, there's not too much to say. It's a super strong tower, but it's super expensive. I don't feel like it needs a price change because you need it for the Vengeful Sun God. So I'm just going to go ahead and place it under an FF tier, and it's only because of the price. Again, I do know that it's a super good tower in Bloons Tower Defense 6, just a little bit more on the expensive side. Now onto the XXL Trap. So with the XXL Trap, I think it goes without saying, it definitely needs more of a price change. I do know that Ninja Kiwi has lowered the price a couple of times, but I still feel like Ninja Kiwi needs to drop it just a little. Next up is the Elite Sniper. So with the Elite Sniper, probably gonna have a couple of people disagree, but I do feel like the Elite Sniper needs a little bit of a rework, because when it comes down to it, there's really no reason to go for the Elite Sniper unless you're going for the achievement, which is of course Axis of Havoc. Moving on to the Ray of Doom. So with the Ray of Doom, I feel like there needs to be a little bit of a price change. I don't feel like there needs to be like a rework or a buff, because I do feel like the Ray of Doom is definitely a super good tower to go for in Bloons Tower Defense 6, but it's just a little bit too expensive. I would like to see it like be a little bit more expensive than the MAD or the Bloon Exclusion Zone, or at least around the same price. But like, having the Ray of Doom be as expensive as it is, I really just don't see it, especially since I feel like the Bloon Exclusion Zone is definitely a better tower overall than the Ray of Doom. Next up is the Plasma Monkey Fan Club. So with the Plasma Monkey Fan Club, I think it goes without saying, it definitely needs either a price change or a rework, because like its current like power level, I feel is just like very underwhelming. I do know that it's super strong when you get all 19 dart monkeys set up, but when it comes down to it, it's not really worth the price. Next up is the Crippled Moab. I do feel like the Crippled Moab is in a really good position. I wish it did have a little bit of a faster fire rate, or when it comes down to it, I wish it was a little bit cheaper. So because of that, I don't feel like it needs a price change, because like the Crippled Moab is definitely a super good tower to go for. But I do feel like it's kind of underwhelming, especially for the price that you. So because of that, I will go ahead and place it as a low B tier underneath the Ultra Jug. Now, if we're talking about the tier 4, I would definitely place it under an S tier, because of course, like the main Moab is extremely strong. Now onto the Glue Storm. I think it goes without saying, guys, like I think the Glue Storm needs a rework or a buff, because like when it comes down to it, like it's just better to go for either the balloon solver or the super glue, because like the glue storm, the only use for the glue storm is in the races, because like you can send all the rounds at the same time. But outside of the races, there's really no use for the glue storm that either the super glue or the balloon solver can't deal with themselves. Even though that I do know the glue storm is. Next up is going to be the Apache Prime. Now, the Apache Prime has been a strong tower that I've used in a lot of chimps modes. Super easy strat to set up. I do feel like the prices are very good, but I do feel it's kind of underwhelming and it doesn't deserve an S tier, because you definitely do need to provide quite a few buffs on the Apache Prime to make it super effective. So I will be placing it right next to the Avatar of Wrath, because when it comes down to it, I do feel like it's pretty much around the same strength as the Avatar of Wrath when the Avatar of Wrath is buffed. Next up is going to be Monkeyopolis. So this is a tower that I think drastically needs a rework in Bloons Tower Defense 6. I would like to see it have a similar effect as the Energizer, where it only buffs heroes opposed to like buffing towers. I think that's a really cool option that Ninja QB could go for, because like I said, there's only one tower that ends up buffing heroes in Bloons Tower Defense 6, and that of course is going to be. So next up is going to be the Bomb Blitz. So the Bomb Blitz is definitely a tower that I don't use as often as I should, because like when I think of Bomb Blitz, I just think of the fact that it will delete every single balloon on the screen. But in order for that to happen, you definitely need to leak at least one balloon. So because of that, I am going to be placing it as a low B tier. It probably deserves to be in a higher B tier, but I am going to be keeping it where it is. I actually want to move Cripple Moab up just a little bit, because like Cripple Moab is definitely a little bit more of a stronger tower. So Banana Central, Monkeynomics, and Monkey Wall Street are all money towers. There really isn't a good place to rank them, because of course like they're definitely towers that we're going to use. Some are better than others. Some are good with Monkey Knowledge turned on. Some really don't matter too much if you have Monkey Knowledge turned on. So we'll go ahead and leave the money towers down here at the bottom. Next up is the Energizer. So with the Energizer, I will be placing it as a high B tier, because the Energizer, it's not very good late game, but because it buffs heroes and it also buffs towers that have abilities in Bloons Tower Defense 6, I definitely believe that is a strong tower in Bloons Tower Defense 6. Next up is going to be the Master Bomber. So I want this tower to be so good, but at the same time, I feel like the Master Bomber needs a little bit of a price decrease. I do know that once you like spam it with Shinobi's, it gets stronger, but at the same time, I do feel like this tower needs a little bit of a price nerf in order for it to be usable in chips modes. I do know that it's definitely a little bit better in other game modes, like in probable mode, where it has a little bit more support options. But there we have it, guys. This is my personal tier list for Bloons Tower Defense 6. I did not reference anybody else. This is just what I personally believe to be the better towers in Bloons Tower Defense 6. All the way from towers you need to use, all the way down to need buffs. So that being said, please feel free to let me know in the comments below what you guys think of this tier list. If I placed any towers a little bit too high, if I placed towers too low, or if you guys feel like these towers that I placed down here with the price changes and the reworks belong there. Because again, these are just towers that I feel like need a little bit of a price decrease, and these are towers that I feel like need a whole rework or a buff in general. The only two towers that kind of could be changed around is of course going to be the Superstorm, because the Superstorm could get a price nerf and it could be a little bit more practical to use. But anyways, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed, please feel free to hit that like button. Also, if you guys haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe as well. I do upload quite a bit of Bloons Tower Defense 6 content. But anyways, guys, you already know what time it is. I hope you guys have the most amazing day of your lives, and I will see you guys in the next one.